Hello everyone, my name is Garrett and welcome to my tutorial series on the Unreal Engine 4. This tutorial series will be going over how to make a platformer in the Unreal Engine 4 using specifically the engine version 4.18, and it will be used primarily for people who are beginners or just getting into game development or who really just kind of want to pick up the Unreal Engine 4 in a way that's easy to understand and not too complex or dives into too much coding. Thankfully the platformer we'll be making is quite simple, and hopefully we'll be able to make something awesome out of it. So getting started, what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at the basic interface and introduce you guys to what you're looking at right now, because it may be a bit of a surprise or a bit complex if you've never really seen a software like this before. But that's okay, we'll take it one by one. So when you guys first open up the project or open up Unreal, you'll notice it'll prompt you to create a project. What I've done with this tutorial series is I've chosen the first person blueprint or first person template using starter content on and maximum quality. And you can just pick the path for whatever you like to where you want to save the project. Okay, so now you should be here with me. Let's break down the UI. Well, it's broken down a couple pieces. In the very center of the screen, you'll see your viewport. This is your 3D workspace. This is where you'll see your level and all of your content in 3D space. On the bottom here, you'll see your content browser. Your content browser is a storage location for all your assets, your blueprints, your scripts, your levels, and everything relating to the content that's used in your project. As you can see, it has various buttons on the top. We can go over these in a future video. You have actual things in here. You have folders, and if you double click, you have other assets inside. For example, this is the level. If you go back and go to first person, let's say we go into animations. We have a whole bunch of different types of assets of different types, as you can tell from the color scheme on the bottom. And so this is just a storage location. It'll show you everything you have in your project. And thankfully so, the template gives us a lot of starter content, and that starter content option we used in the beginning will also give us a bunch of stuff we can play with as we make our project. So looking elsewhere, on the very, very top, we have our toolbar. These are primarily buttons relating to your project and how your project functions. I won't go too heavily in depth, but to give you an overview, we have our save button, pretty self-explanatory. Source control, for anyone who's familiar with version control systems, UE4 does have an integrated way of handling it. However, for this project, we won't get into it. Content. This just opens the content browser. Marketplace. UE4 or Epic Games has a marketplace you can get assets for the Unreal Engine 4. We won't dive into it for this project, but if you're interested in exploring or getting your own content, that's always an option. Settings. Settings is just settings relating to your world, your level, your project, how your engine's viewing and rendering things on the scene. All kinds of things. So we won't go too depth into a lot of these because they're not necessary. But if you're interested in fiddling around, changing things up, you can take a look. However, actually one thing to mention is that if you are running into issues where your computer's lagging, because the engine is a very, very powerful engine, you may want to go to settings, go to material quality level, adjust this between these three settings based on what you think what your computer can handle, and then go to engine scalability settings, and then pick a level for all of these that you think your computer can handle. For example, mine's set at Epic, just because I don't think my computer can handle cinematic, but I also don't think it doesn't necessarily have to go as low as high. So yeah, adjust these as you see fit. Next to that, we have blueprints. This just has some options relating to blueprinting. We'll get into blueprints in another video, but something to be aware of. Cinematics, some options relating to adding level sequences or master sequences or just matinee stuff. What those mean, we'll talk about in a future video. Next to that, we have a build button. This relates to how we're going to compute our lighting, build our lighting, bake data into the scene, and build our navigational paths. Again, sounds like a complex subject, but we'll talk about in another video. Last, we have play, and this will be a button we'll be using probably the most up here. If you click the arrow, we have different options for how we want to play it. We can play it using a preview for mobile and a new window that pops out, a standalone game, we can simulate it, different kind of camera starters, all kinds of things. Well, for now, we'll ignore it, but we'll definitely click that in a little bit. And then lastly, launch. We don't need to look at this right now. However, this is just stuff relating to your machine. This is mainly a packaging or kind of end project based thing you want to play with. So right now we don't really need to touch it, but something to consider. So looking to the very right, we have a world outliner. The world outliner is used to view what content's in your scene that you level that you currently have loaded. So with this scene that I currently have loaded, these are the assets that are currently within it. And these are all organized in a parent-child structure. So for example, in this folder, we have a folder called Arena, and in that folder we have all these assets. And you can see, if I select this cube right here, it's selected right here in the viewer. So you can kind of click between, you kind of see, here's the actual names, here are the classes and types that they come from, and so on and so forth. There's a big list of them, and there's many of all different types. We don't need to talk about them right now, but if you want to kind of fiddle around and see what each thing is, you can see them right here. And you'll notice that now, if you click on really any of these, you'll see this detail panel pop up, and it has a ton of information in it. These are all the properties and settings and all the values you can edit based on what you currently have selected in the scene. It's the details of the object. And if you see right here, here is what comprises that object, the different components of it. This is quite complex, and we'll get into it in the future. But if you kind of want to dive in and kind of just see and understand and get a bit of a preview as to what comes with different types of objects, go through the tabs and kind of see, okay, so for physics, for example, oh, what does simulate physics do? You can hover over it and it'll give you kind of a little bit of a preview as to what this button does. There's a ton of options, and we can go over those in a future video, but if you're interested, feel free to take a look. So on the very left side, we have modes. Modes is really just a way of changing the interaction of your system. So for example, we have place, and this is different things you can place in your scene. For example, if I want to add, let's see, basic, I want to add a cube. I can click it, I can drag it, and I suddenly have a cube. So it's kind of like a placer. Unlike this, where this is a lot of custom content, this is stuff that the engine kind of has pre-configured for you. So I can add a cube, I can add a plane, I can add stairs, all kinds of things. So, and then there's paint. Painting is primarily used for landscaping, but there's also other uses for it. We can talk about it in the future. Landscape. This one's a bit complex. You may see it starting to compile shaders. This allows you to make terrain, morphable terrain where you can actually make landscapes. Something we won't get into this project, but I can certainly make a video on it in the future. Foliage. This is, again, relating to foliage and vegetation of all types, something related to making generally outdoor projects. We won't get into it in this series, but definitely something we can talk about in the future. And lastly, geometry editing. This comes with a concept called BSP. We won't talk about it in this episode, but we can certainly go over BSP into what it is and how you use it and utilize it in a future video. So that's kind of a basic overview of everything. The last thing you may want to know is, so how do I move around here? To move around in the viewport, hold down right click. That'll turn the camera like this. And if you want to move the camera, hold down left click. And so by combining these, you can move, rotate, look, and move all around your scene, view the things you've created, get up close, see the pixels, all sorts of things. You can go through the floor, and you can preview all that you like. And if you really want to play around a bit more, there's additional options in this viewport. On top left, these are a couple options to display how your scene's rendered. And show, these are going to show you different things and hide certain things. For example, let's say we don't want to see BSP. This object is a BSP. Let's say we want to just make it invisible. We can go here and just turn that off, and it's gone. And it's essentially an object. There's a option for every single possible thing you could imagine, and there's all in here as well. So if you want to play around and just fiddle and see what you can do with your scene, there you go. There's some options right there. You have the second button right here. This has changed how your scene's rendered. So for example, right now, lighting is on. So we have shadows, we have lighting, looks good. You can click unlit, and now no more lighting. And I'm sure you've never seen something like this before if you're getting new into game engines. But it's a very interesting thing to see. Next up, we have wireframe. This is all the edges and points of everything that comprises all of the content in the game. I know, very, very interesting looking. And there's a multitude of other interesting things you can see. For now, we don't need to get into them. And lastly, we have the camera view. For example, right now we're in perspective. We have the 3D depth as if we were looking through two eyes. If we turn on top, or really any of these options, we're going orthographic. Orthographic means straight on, which is a 2D outlook. So now if we zoom out, everything is perfectly flat in 2D. So it's a way of saying, okay, let's get rid of the perspective depth. Let's just look at it as if we were looking at like just 2D. It's a tool we'll be utilizing in the future. It may not be as helpful to you right now, but something to play with. Now, you may ask yourself, but I don't really want to have to, each time I want to switch between them, going like here and picking one and here going back. You're right. I agree. There's actually, if you look at the very top right, and click that little button, it'll open a 4-panel view. And now you can leave each one open and they're using a separate view. And so now you can easily switch between them, zoom in, move around, and you'll be able to have access to all types of views at once. And if you're ready, you can just click this button again to maximize the selected viewport. Lastly, a little thing just to kind of wrap up the video. On the top right, you have additional options relating to your Gizmo and how you transform and move things around the scene. This will be, for example, if I select this cube, by just left clicking, if I press W, it displays this little arrow. This is called the Gizmo, or the transform widget. If I press E, E is rotation, and R is scale. And you'll see each one looks different. So W, E, R, those are your keys to transform and move objects around the scene. So let's just go with W. If I click this red arrow and hold it and move it, I move it. I click this, I move it that way. If I click this little 2D box, it'll move it in both of those directions. If I move it in the very, very center, it'll move it in whatever direction, in all 3 directions. Cool. And if you're interested in what these 3 arrows represent, in the very, very bottom left, we'll have 3 little arrows. These are the axes, or the axes representing 3D space. So left and right would, in this context, would be the Y. Z would be the depth, or sorry, X would be the depth, and then Z would be up and down. So if you're curious, the color scheme, you can always refer to this little image right here. If we hold E down, or press E down, we can rotate it. And lastly, if we press R, we can scale it and stretch it. In the very, very top right, these little icons right here, these represent how we can modify the effects of this widget. For example, let's say, you see how when I move it, it just snaps to very, very small increments. Let's say I want to increase it, so it snaps in really big increments. If I go to here, so the option representing this one, and go here, these are the sizes of your snap. So how big is the distance between the snap points? Let's say we want it to be really, really big. We go to 100, 10 times. Now it's snapping in really, really big increments. If I want to disable that so it doesn't snap at all, I can just click this button right here, and then it no longer snaps. It's completely independent of the grid. And the same thing applies to this right here, which is your rotation. You can say rotate on 60. Now it snap rotates. And the same thing applies to scale. I can scale like this, so it snaps. It's like boom, boom. And lastly, the last little button here, that's the speed of your camera. So you'll notice that when I hold down both buttons, okay, I'm pretty quick, but maybe I want to go faster. I have a big scene, I have lots of stuff, I want to fly around. I can click this, and I can increase this. And suddenly now, I'm super fast. I'm flying around, I have lots of motion, I no longer feel slow. Yeah, and that seems to about wrap up to do it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns you have so far on this series. Next video, we'll be going into how to actually build a scene. Let's get started with playing. Let's get started with bringing assets in, building up some walls, maybe, and experiencing what kind of gameplay the first-person template has brought us, and seeing what can we do, and let's start planning what our platformer project is going to look like. Thank you for joining me.